Двери, двери, премудростью вон мемон.
Good evening from the Monastery of All Saints of North America. We're coming to you from the Canadian Orthodox Broadcasting.ca, and we're presenting a little bit of a new format for some of our broadcasts, at least for the Canadian Orthodox Broadcasting System. We're going to adopt a bit of a talk show and panel format. A little later we'll have Jim Forrest, the founder of the Orthodox Peace Fellowship, and David Goa, the director of the Chester Ronning Center at the University of Alberta. And we'll try to make a varied program. But one thing we're going to try to maintain is to take select news items from around the world and give some commentary on them, sometimes with a distinctly Orthodox content and sometimes simply commenting on the news and some of the things that are happening. There are, of course, a lot of positive things that happen in our world, but very often those are the things that are not noticed, not given quite enough prominence in the secular press, and some of our Orthodox publications are more interested in doom and gloom and not interested enough in the great things that some people in our world are doing. I recall that the late Father John Meyendorff, when talking about the development of medicine, said that one reason medicine developed so much faster in the Byzantine Empire or Eastern Roman Empire than in the West was because in the East Christians were far more optimistic about humanity, about mankind. And he said that at the time in the West they were more interested in how mankind should be punished for his sins, while in the East they were interested in the healing of humanity, but also had an optimism about the possibilities for humanity and the nature of mankind himself. Mankind is essentially good. Evil is like a virus that infects us. Whereas the late Father John Romanidis once said, like a parasite that inhabits or latches onto us, well, really parasitically. And the flesh isn't evil. Evil is again a parasite on the flesh, but also a virus in the mind. But evil is not the natural state of mankind. And the fallen human being is not totally depraved. There is an essential goodness in humanity which comes through, particularly in times of catastrophe, in times when other people really need our help, when we see other people suffering and respond to it. These are the great moments of humanity, and they show the initial goodness of mankind in the responses that are made in these terrible times, in these terrible catastrophes. Suffering has a way of making us truly human. It brings out the best in our humanity. And perhaps this is one reason why Jesus Christ wanted us to see him suffer visibly on the cross, because it would call upon our hearts and call upon the better qualities of our humanity responding to that suffering, and so open to us a greater understanding of what his gospel is and about what redemption consists in. There are a few newspaper articles particularly from the Vancouver Sun this time, that I wanted to discuss a little. And one of these is about the Arab Spring and a dimension of it which has perhaps not been reported very well in the Western press. And the Arab Spring started off with this great dream of real democracy. In Tahrir Square in Cairo, a lot of the women were directing the action, and young men and young women were participating together in what for them was going to be a quest for real democracy. It didn't take long after the fall of the dictatorship for religious fanatics to begin to take over and to crush the hopes of democracy. But the hopes were crushed primarily for women, for girls. The men would still have the certain kinds of freedom that they would have, even in a fundamentalist state. But women would be crushed again and pushed down. So a movement called Girls for Change has grown up in Egypt and other parts of the Arab world. And I really want to call attention to it because I think it's marvelous. A 16-year-old girl is using her blog to empower other females and add fuel to a gender revolution in the Islamic world, to bring about some kind of genuine change and really advocate that women should be participants in the fullness of democracy. And this is one thing that I really think is a subject that we should discuss with all fundamentalist movements in democratic societies. In a democratic society, we cannot pick and choose who it is who benefits from the fruits of democracy. Democracy is an all or none situation. We cannot say the people I agree with and the people I like should have the full benefits of democracy, but the people I don't like, or the people who are outside my ideological sphere of thought, the people that I don't agree with, the people that I think are sinners, the people that I think are somehow, they're not me, they're not us. So they should be denied the full benefits of democracy. From a Protestant point of view, of course, that would include Orthodox Christians who are outsiders, and as many Protestants say, well, you're almost but not quite Christians. So should Orthodox Christians then benefit from the full fruits of democracy? Because after all, we're not really Christians according to the majority of religious people in the United States. So we want to take this time to, we know a lot of these women have to be, at this time, anonymous in their websites and blog sites because they really are risking their lives. However, the movement has gotten some roots in Tunisia and Egypt and even in Libya. We notice in Algeria that the fundamentalists lost out in the elections, and part of that had to do with the fact that women are taking more and more of a voice, and they want to benefit in the benefits of democracy. So this young woman, who's Doa, and I wouldn't pronounce her name properly, Doa Misherim, has really, as a 16-year-old, shown enormous courage in commencing this website and giving voice to this movement, Girls for Change. It's really the sort of thing that we should support, and really the sort of thing that we should sincerely hope will come to a successful ending. The tragedy of women in so many of these countries is simply completely beyond description. And for young women, really teenage girls, to have the courage realizing that they can be killed. They can be disenfranchised, punished, beaten, and degraded and humiliated for even walking the street in public very often without an adult or any male member of their family accompanying them to chaperone them. And for a 22-year-old woman, it might be an 8-year-old brother who's her chaperone. And this kind of demeaning and humiliation and degradation of women is something that is really unimaginable in our society and our culture. And it shows, again, the dangers of all fundamentalisms, whether it's Christian fundamentalism, Hindu, Islamic, Buddhist, or even whether it's Orthodox Christian fundamentalism. All of them are dangerous and destructive. And I want to hail these girls who have taken this upon themselves to advocate and call for democracy to be extended to all the citizens, and for an authentic democracy, and for women to be full participants in democracy, in the fruits of democracy. Another article that caught my attention, and the title of the article is rather humorous. Potty-mouthed dad wants to curb son's foul-mouthed mimicking. Now it happens that a father in Vancouver has a son, so I think 7 or 8-year-old son, who hears his father cursing and swearing all the time, and has begun to imitate it. And he imitates it at school. And the parents of other children hear their own kids picking up this language, and they forbid their children to play with or associate with this boy. And the teachers also are complaining about it. And it got to be such an issue in the school and among other parents that they actually went to interview the father. And I'm not going to identify him in this broadcast, but the father said, well, yes, I know he's picked up all this from me, but, you know, in the trade that I grew up in, and my father grew up in, and my brothers grew up in, we all swear and curse like sailors. And I don't know, I'm too old to change myself, but I want to know how to change my son and break him of the habit, although I'm too old to change. And the reporter suggested to him that if he wouldn't change, the son isn't going to change either, because he's the one who's setting the example. And this is something that's extremely important for us. We sometimes look around and say, well, my children, they don't want to come to church anymore, they don't want to pray anymore, they don't want to think about God anymore, they're not following our faith or our religion. And behind that, there has to be something to do with the example we set for them. Now someone can say, oh, but I go to church every Sunday and I say my prayers and I'm an Orthodox Christian. Why don't my children want to participate? You pay tithes of mint and rue, but you leave undone the weightier things of the law. Our Lord Jesus Christ once warned us that all of the excess piety or external piety in the world doesn't cover up for hypocrisy and bigotry. It doesn't cover up for hatred and malice and gossip and all these other things that go on. Somewhere behind the children rejecting the faith and not wanting anything to do with it or to participate in it, behind that are the adults in their lives. I remember in the 60s when I was teaching Sunday school at the Russian Church in Vancouver on Campbell Avenue. And I was just a kid myself, but in any case, I was the only one who could speak English well enough, I think, to teach Sunday school. And during the Sunday school class, we had sometimes a little bit of humor. We would add some humor to the stories to make the kids more interested and to make being there in the Sunday school, participating in the church, not really so heavy, but to give it some kind of joy. And one of the women came down into the hall during the Sunday school class, and the kids were laughing at something I had said. And she said, oh, making all that noise in the Sunday school class, we should grab them and shake them till our teeth rattle. And another woman from the church happened to be behind her, and she said, yes, Taisia, that's why your children aren't in church today, isn't it? And it was very telling. So behind the potty-mouthed kid is the potty-mouthed dad, who set the example and gave him the language that he uses. And the father freely acknowledges this, but allows us how he's too old to change and he can't change, but the kid should be forced to change somehow. Why should he? If that's his father is his hero, he's the example of his life that he wants to follow. And our bigotry and our hypocrisy and our gossip are also the things that our children pick up on. Now they might reject that, but they see it as being a part of the faith, a part of the religious life. And when they reject hypocrisy and bigotry, they reject the religion that they see as the base of it. And the whole example of the adults that are being set for them. I'm not going to say that if we just behaved ourselves properly and acted like actual Christians, instead of going through the motions, that all of our children would flock back to church. There's a great deal more to be done about it than that. But that certainly is one aspect of it and one part of it. When our children behave badly, when they reject faith, when they start swearing and cursing, we can always say, oh, well, they pick it up from television. And of course, I don't pay any attention to what television programs they watch, so they can pick it up as freely as they want. Or we don't stop and say, well, yeah, what role did I play in this? How did I influence them in such a way that they behave this way, or they talk this way, or they reject the faith this way? Somewhere behind what the children are doing is the actions and attitudes of the adults in their lives. And we can't duck that, and we can't get away from it. If we sit with the family, God help us, sometimes some people actually do sit with their family, and watch television, and we watch vulgar programs with all kinds of cursing and swearing and foul language and things in it. Of course, the children have to take that as a mark of our approval of that kind of behavior and that kind of language. And we have no way to guide them away from it when all they have to do is look at us and say, but you said this, you say that, you act this way, you watch it. So what are we going to say about this? And I have to say that, the recent lecture trip that I made to Oxford University, actually Trinity College, Oxford, the questions and the dialogue with the young people, and these are people in their 20s already, most of them are working on their doctorate, was again verifying what I've said so many times on YouTube broadcasts that seem to make some people really angry. The younger generation are not buying into our prejudices, they're not buying into our bigotries, and they despise our hypocrisies. It's not to say that they don't have their own hypocrisies. Every generation has its own hypocrisies. But when we tie those hypocrisies to the name of Jesus Christ and present them as an aspect of the Orthodox faith, together with sometimes horrible prejudices and bigotries, the younger generation aren't going to buy it. Oh, we can brainwash some of them or bully some of them into it for a while. But overall, they're simply not going to buy into it. And the example that we set ourselves, not always in our external behavior, because young people can read our eyes and they can read our hearts in ways that we forget how to read as we get older. Younger people can detect hypocrisies and bigotries far more easily than older people. They still have an idealism, and they look at things in a more idealistic way. They still have the excitement of discovery, and they're still trying to sort life out. So they're much more keen and much more aware of what's really going on inside of us, no matter what kind of external displays or plays we make. They know if we have a sincere compassion. They know if we're riddled with fear and prejudice and bigotries. And they sense and they're repulsed by them. And when they tie that together with an expression of the faith, or tie it together with an understanding of Jesus Christ, then the end result is what you might expect. A rejection of the faith, a rejection of Christ, a rejection of Christianity altogether. Somewhere behind every young person who follows such a path are the adults in his or her life. And we need to really be cognizant of that. And instead of trying to bully people into accepting our weaknesses and fears and our prejudices and our bigotries and our narrowness of mind, and our medieval mentalities. We should be trying to learn something from the younger generation, because believe me, they have a great deal to teach us. If one were to go through every piece of media one could and pick out the marvelous things that teenagers and young people have done in any given day, in any given week, in any given month, in any given year, we'd suddenly dawn on us that we adults have lost our idealism and become narrow, or those who are riddled with a sort of neurotic fear and have all these mean-minded prejudices. We could learn so much from the younger generation. When I see these young people in their teens really developing things in science and having competitions where the things they develop are amazing. And some of them, of course, receive rewards for this. And then we see the openness and the generosity and the courage of this 16-year-old girl in a society where she could easily be murdered for what she's doing, nevertheless having the courage to do it, to speak out for the greater good of democracy, and really do something that would improve the world. We need to start learning something from the younger generation. And maybe we've become cynical. Maybe we've alienated ourselves from a sense of the higher capacities and the higher goodness of humanity. But younger generation are often still idealistic. And a lot of the trouble that people get into, the difficulties that young people get into, somewhere behind it all are the adults in their lives. And the example, and maybe you say, well, we never took drugs, and look what some of the younger people are doing. No, but we created a society of meism, of me first. We've created a society of greed and avarice, where worthiness is really measured in terms of material goods. And we can't really duck that issue. Our generation has developed a kind of consumerism which is really bizarre and I think genuinely immoral. And when we talk about morality, and then we see nothing wrong with destroying the whole biosphere upon which future generations depend for existence, and we see nothing wrong with consuming and consuming and consuming and living in a disposable society where the things we dispose help destroy the world in which we live. These are moral issues. These are the real moral issues. The immorality of consumerism, the immorality of ignoring the biosphere, really hurting not just a few people, but hurting everyone on the face of the earth. You cannot say, I should do whatever I want as long as it does not hurt somebody else. To a young person, and then do whatever you want and help destroy and hurt everyone on the face of the earth. You see the hypocrisy of that. So we, as adults, need to not only learn some very, very important lessons from the younger generation, we need to have more respect for them, and we need to realize the vast majority of the troubles and problems that young people get involved in are rooted in the adults in their lives. Thank you, and God bless you.